Your support keeps these stories alive. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell.
My name is Thomas. I am 38 years old. And for most of my life, I believed that family was supposed to be sacred, a bond unshakable no matter the circumstances. My parents raised me on values like loyalty, hard work, and honesty. They would tell me, over and over, that if you sacrifice now, you can reap the rewards later. I believe them. I live my life by those words. But what I didn't know back then was that sometimes the very people who teach you those lessons are the first to betray them. And in my case, it was my own parents, the people I trusted the most, who committed the ultimate act of betrayal. They sold the house I built with my bare hands for $400,000 without ever telling me. It all began when I was in my late 20s. I had been working construction jobs since I was 18, saving every dollar I could. I skipped vacations, lived frugally, and spent countless weekends working overtime because I had one dream: to build my own home. Not just any home, but a house that would stand as a legacy, a place where my future kids could grow, a place that carried the sweat and soul of every nail hammered, every wall raised. By the time I was 30, I had saved enough money to buy a piece of land just outside town. I still remember the day I signed the deed. My parents were there, smiling proudly, telling me how much they admired my determination. The land wasn't much then, just a stretch of overgrown grass with an old barn leaning on its last legs. But to me, it was everything. I poured myself into it. Nights after work, I would drive out there with a flashlight and sketch ideas. Weekends were spent leveling the ground, laying the foundation, framing the walls. I did most of it with my own hands, though sometimes my father would come out and hand me tools, telling me he was proud. "This house will stand long after I'm gone," he once said, smiling at me. I thought that meant something. I thought he meant it was mine. That IT took nearly 5 years of relentless effort. I worked through rain, through blistering heat, even through injuries. I broke 2 ribs once after falling off scaffolding, but still dragged myself back the next week. By the time I was 35, the house stood proud. A 2-story home with wide windows, a wraparound porch, and a fireplace I had built stone by stone. It wasn't just a structure. It was my blood, my time, my sacrifice embodied in wood, brick, and steel, and my parents would come by often, smiling, admiring it, even inviting friends to show them our son's house. I didn't mind. I felt proud when they showed me off. I thought they were proud of me too. But slowly, I started noticing things that didn't sit right. My father began asking about the property deed more than usual. My mother asked once why I had put the land title under the family name instead of solely mine. I explained that when I bought it, I trusted them, so the deed was technically shared because at the time I didn't think much of it. I thought, naively, that parents would never betray their own son. The truth came crashing down 2 years later. I was 38 when I came home one evening and saw my parents sitting in the living room with expressions I couldn't read. My father cleared his throat and said, "Tom, we need to talk." He explained it like it was nothing, like it was just another piece of business. They had sold the house. Not asked me, not warned me. They had sold the house, the home I had built, the dream I had sacrificed everything for, to some buyers for $400,000, and my ears rang, my vision blurred, and my heart slammed against my ribs. "What do you mean you sold it?" I shouted. My father's voice was firm, cold. "It's family property, Tom. The deed had our names too. We made the decision." My mother tried to soften it, saying, "We needed the money, sweetheart. You can always build another one." Build another one? As if you could rebuild years of sweat, sleepless nights, and sacrifices like they were nothing more than bricks stacked in a pile. The rage that consumed me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever felt. My parents, the very people who taught me to work hard and value honesty, had stolen from me. They had betrayed me. I stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard it shook the frame. I drove for hours that night, my hands gripping the wheel, my mind replaying every moment of my youth when I had trusted them, every dollar I'd handed over when they needed help, every time I had believed their words about loyalty and family. And now they had cashed in my life's work behind my back. That night, alone in my truck, I made a decision. They had taken everything from me: my home, my security, my pride. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I wasn't going to just walk away and start over like some obedient child. No, if they thought they could sell my future and face no consequences, they didn't know me at all. I was going to take revenge. The night after I learned what my parents had done, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my fists clenched, my mind spinning with anger and disbelief. How could they do this? How could the two people who raised me, who claimed to be proud of me, sell my house, the home I had built with my bare hands, for $400,000 behind my back? It was more than betrayal. It was a knife driven into my back by the very hands I thought would protect me. By morning, the rage had calcified into resolve. I knew I had to confront them directly, and I knew it wouldn't be pretty that I drove to their house that day, my heart pounding like a drum the entire way. When I walked in, my father was sitting in his recliner, reading the paper, as if nothing had happened. My mother was in the kitchen making coffee, humming softly like it was any other morning. The normalcy of it all made me want to scream. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. My father didn't even look up at first. "Tom, we've been over this. The decision's made." That one sentence lit a fire in me that I exploded. I told them exactly what they had taken from me, how many years of my life had gone into that house. I reminded them of the nights I came home with blistered hands, of the times I skipped meals to save money for materials, of the broken ribs I worked through because I believed in finishing what I started. "You didn't just sell a house," I shouted, my voice cracking with fury. "You sold my blood, my sweat, my future." My mother burst into tears, saying they hadn't meant to hurt me, that they needed the money because of financial troubles. But her excuses sounded hollow. My father finally stood up, his face red, his voice booming. "You should have put the deed in your own name if you wanted to keep it. You left it with us, and we did what we thought was best." Best for who? Certainly not for me. That was the moment I realized they weren't sorry. They weren't ashamed. They felt entitled, as if everything I had built was theirs to control simply because they were my parents. That realization hardened me. I knew begging or appealing to their emotions was pointless. If I wanted justice, if I wanted revenge, I had to be smarter than them. I started digging. I contacted the buyers, a couple from out of state who had no idea of the story behind the house. I pretended to be polite, but I asked questions about the deal, about how much they paid, about the paperwork. Every answer they gave confirmed what I already knew. My parents had made a clean sale, pocketing every cent of the $400,000. My parents hadn't planned to give me a dime. That night, I sat at my desk with a bottle of whiskey and the deed copies I still had in my files. I studied every line, every clause. The more I read, the angrier I became, but also the more determined. There were legal paths I could take, but I also knew the system might not be on my side, since the property was technically co-owned. If I couldn't win through the law, then I would have to win another way. That I began planning small acts to remind them that they hadn't broken me. I stopped visiting their house, stopped answering their calls. When they showed up at my apartment one evening, knocking on the door with worried faces, I refused to let them in. "You made your choice," I told them through the closed door. "Now live with it." I wanted them to feel the sting of losing me, the son who had always been there for them. But distance wasn't enough. Revenge, real revenge, had to hit them where it hurt the most: their reputation, their pride, and eventually their finances. My father loved showing off to his friends, boasting about his business deals, bragging about the house he had helped build. So I started quietly spreading the truth to people who mattered in our community. At the bar where his old friends gathered, I told one of them what had really happened, that my parents had stolen their son's home and sold it for profit. Word spread like wildfire. Within weeks, the admiration they once received turned into whispers of disgust. Neighbors stopped greeting them with smiles. Church friends avoided them. Their perfect image began to crumble. Every time I saw my father's shoulders slump a little lower, every time I saw my mother's forced smile fade quicker, I felt a grim satisfaction. But even as I executed my plan, a part of me felt the weight of it. This was my family. These were the people who raised me, fed me, taught me to ride a bike. And yet here I was, dismantling their lives piece by piece because they had dismantled mine. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary, One night, my father called me. His voice was low, defeated. Tom, what do you want from us? Money? An apology? Just tell me. I gripped the phone tightly and said, I want you to feel what I felt, to lose what you value most. Only then will you understand. I hung up before he could respond. For the first time in my life, I no longer felt like their son. I felt like their enemy. And in that war, I was just getting started. After that phone call, I realized my parents were finally starting to feel the weight of what they had done. But to me, it wasn't nearly enough. They had sold my dream for $400,000 and expected me to just move on, like a child throwing a tantrum over a broken toy. No, I wanted them to live with the same humiliation, the same helplessness I had lived with the night I discovered the betrayal. If money was what they wanted, then reputation was what I would take from them. I started with my father's business. He had run a small contracting company in town for nearly 20 years, and most of his clients came from word of mouth. People trusted him because he had a good name, a reputation for honesty. I knew that name was his pride, so I began talking to people. Not angrily, not like some bitter son, but calmly, like someone sharing a warning. At the supply store, I'd say, careful with my father's deals. He's the same man who sold his son's house behind his back for profit. At the diner, where contractors gathered, I'd casually mention, funny how my parents cashed in $400,000 by betraying their own son. I didn't need to shout. I just had to plant the seed. And seeds have a way of growing fast in a small town. Within a month, the calls to his company slowed. He complained to my mother that old clients weren't returning his messages. He snapped at me once when I passed him in town, muttering, You think you're clever? You're destroying us. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, I'm not destroying you. You did that the moment you sold my house. His face turned red, but he said nothing more. At the same time, I began working on something else. A legal angle. I had been poring over property law with a lawyer friend of mine, and though the deed technically gave them the right to sell, there were loopholes, questions about intent, about fraud, about whether they had misrepresented ownership when dealing with the buyers. It was complicated, and I knew I might not win, but just filing a case would drag them through months of legal stress, legal fees, and public scrutiny. And so I did it. I filed a civil suit accusing them of misusing shared ownership and acting in bad faith. The day they were served, my mother called me sobbing, begging me to drop it. I told her coldly, Did you think about me when you signed those papers? Did you think about my years of work? My future? No? Then don't expect me to think about your comfort now. The pressure began to crush them. My mother avoided neighbors because she couldn't stand the whispers. My father stopped going to the bar where he used to brag about his life because now he was the punchline of every story. At family gatherings, relatives quietly asked me what had really happened, and I told them the truth with no hesitation. I could see the shame written across my parents' faces each time. It was working. My revenge was working. But revenge is a strange thing. The more I pushed, the emptier I felt. Yes, I saw them suffer. Yes, I saw cracks in their pride. But late at night, lying alone in my small apartment, I sometimes wondered if I had gone too far. After all, these were still my parents. The people who had once read me bedtime stories, who had bandaged my knees when I fell off my bike. Was I punishing them for this betrayal, or was I punishing them for every resentment I had buried since childhood? One evening, my father showed up at my door. His face looked older, beaten down, his eyes carrying a weight I had never seen before. He didn't yell this time. He didn't demand. He just asked, Why, Tom? Why are you doing this to us? I stared at him for a long time before answering. Because you sold my life for $400,000. Because you took what wasn't yours. Because you treated me not like a son, but like an obstacle. And because I want you to feel what it's like to lose everything. He tried to argue, but his voice cracked. For the first time, I saw my father speechless, but even that wasn't enough for me. I wanted them to understand in their bones that their betrayal could never be erased. So I doubled down on the lawsuit. I collected every receipt, every statement, every piece of evidence that showed how much I had invested in building that house. Materials, tools, even loan payments I'd taken out to cover construction costs. Each document became a weapon. Each photo of me working on the foundation, of me covered in dust and sweat, became proof. proof that the house had been mine in every way except on paper. The more I gathered, the more I realized this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about standing up for myself in a way I had never done before. My parents had always held control over me, always made me feel like I owed them something. But not anymore. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and now I was going to make sure they paid for it in every possible way that I filed the final stack of evidence with my lawyer. I felt something shift inside me. The pain was still there, the anger still burning, but beneath it was something new, strength. I wasn't just their son anymore. I was a man fighting for what was his. And this war was far from over. The day of the hearing arrived with a tension I could feel in my bones. I walked into the courthouse dressed in the same suit I had worn only twice before. Once for a job interview, once for a wedding. Now it was for a trial against the two people who had given me life. The irony was almost too much to bear. As I sat at the plaintiff's table with my lawyer, I glanced across the room. My parents were there, looking smaller than I had ever seen them. My father's shoulders hunched, his hair thinner, his eyes ringed with dark circles. My mother clutched her purse with trembling hands, her face pale as though she had aged 10 years since the day I filed. For a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. Then I remembered $400,000. I remembered the years of labor, the nights of pain, the dream ripped away from me. And just like that, the guilt vanished. The judge called the session to order, and my lawyer began laying out the evidence. He spoke with precision, bringing up each receipt, each photo, each bank transaction that proved how much I had poured into that house. I watched the judge's face as he flipped through pages of documentation, nodding slightly at the sheer weight of evidence. Then it was my turn. I took the stand, my palms sweating as I raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth. When I began speaking, my voice shook at first, but soon it grew steady. I told the court about the years I had worked construction, about saving every spare dollar since I was 18. I described the land, the barn, the endless weekends spent hammering and sweating while my friends were out enjoying their 20s. I spoke about the broken ribs, the nights I slept in my truck just to be closer to the site. And finally, I described the moment I came home to find out the house was gone, sold without a word to me. They didn't just sell property, I said, my voice thick with emotion. They sold my life's work. They sold my future. When my parents' lawyer cross-examined me, he tried to paint me as careless, saying I should have secured the deeds solely in my name. I didn't deny it. Yes, I admitted, I trusted them too much. I trusted them because they were my parents. I never imagined my own family would betray me. The courtroom went silent at that. I saw the jury glance at my parents, their faces a mix of disbelief and judgment. Then it was my father's turn on the stand. For the first time in my life, I watched him squirm. He tried to argue that the property had always been family-owned, that selling it had been a financial necessity. But when the judge pressed him, asking why I had never been informed, why none of the profit had been shared, his answers faltered. My mother broke down completely when she spoke, her voice trembling through tears as she claimed they had only wanted to help with debts. But when asked to produce proof of those debts, their lawyer could provide nothing substantial. That it was brutal, and I won't lie. Watching them corner like that towards something deep inside me. They were still my parents, and seeing them stripped of their dignity was painful. But another part of me, the part that remembered every drop of sweat that went into that house, felt vindicated by the end of the hearing. The judge didn't deliver a final verdict yet, but he made one thing clear. My case had merit. He acknowledged the overwhelming evidence of my personal investment and the questionable manner of the sale. He ordered further financial disclosures from my parents, documents that would show exactly where the $400,000 had gone. When a gavel came down, my parents looked devastated. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother sobbed quietly into a handkerchief. Outside the courthouse, I stood on the steps, breathing in the crisp air. Reporters weren't there. It wasn't that kind of case, but people from town had shown up. Some of them nodded to me in quiet support. One older man clapped my shoulder and said, "You did the right thing, son. Blood doesn't give anyone the right to steal from you." Those words sank deep. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and thought about everything. Revenge had brought me here, but now it wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about justice, about finally breaking free from the control my parents had always held over me. For years, I had lived under their shadow, desperate for approval. Now I realized approval meant nothing if it came at the cost of my dignity. Still, part of me couldn't help but wonder, what if I won? What if the court forced them to give me back part of the money, or even penalize them for bad faith? Would I feel better? Would it fill the hole they had carved out of me? Or was I chasing something that didn't exist, a sense of closure that might never come? As I poured myself a drink and stared out the window into the dark night, one thing was certain. The fight wasn't over. The final chapter was still to come, and when it arrived, it would decide not just the fate of my parents, but the kind of man I would be when the dust finally settled. The final hearing arrived like the slow toll of a bell. Weeks had passed since the judge requested full financial disclosures from my parents, and in those weeks, I had lived in a haze of anticipation and bitterness. When the day finally came, I walked into the courtroom calm on the outside, but inside my chest was a storm. My lawyer had the documents neatly stacked, proof of exactly what had been done with the $400,000 my parents had taken. As I glanced at my mother and father across the room, I realized they looked like shells of themselves. My father's suit hung loosely on his frame, his once proud shoulders slouched. My mother's eyes were hollow, her hands wringing a tissue over and over. This was not the picture-perfect couple I grew up with. This was the wreckage of betrayal exposed to the light. The disclosures revealed everything. The money hadn't gone to medical bills or emergency debts, as my mother had claimed. It hadn't gone to secure the family's future, as my father once implied. It had gone to pay off my father's gambling losses and to cover years of reckless spending they had kept hidden from me. Vacations I hadn't known about, renovations to their own home, even gifts to relatives who never lifted a finger to earn them. Page after page, the judge read through the records, and each page felt like another nail in the coffin of whatever love and respect I had left for them. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't hold back. I told the court about every year of work, every injury, every sacrifice I had made to build that house. I explained how I had trusted my parents because they were my parents, because I believed family meant something sacred. And then I said the words I never thought I would speak aloud. Your Honor, they taught me that loyalty matters, that hard work matters. But when the time came, they betrayed everything they ever taught me. They didn't just sell a house. They sold me. My father tried to defend himself one last time, raising his voice, saying I had left the deed in their name willingly, that it was legally their right. The judge silenced him with a raised hand. Legality does not absolve bad faith, he said firmly. My mother wept openly, whispering apologies I no longer believed. Then came the ruling. The judge declared that while the property sale itself could not be reversed, my parents were guilty of acting in bad faith as co-owners, deliberately concealing the sale and misusing shared assets. He ordered them to pay me restitution, half of the $400,000, plus damages for fraudulent misrepresentation. The number echoed in the courtroom, more than $200,000. My parents gasped, my mother covering her face, my father gripping the table with white knuckles. The gavel came down. It was over.as I walked out of the courthouse. A strange mix of emotions surged through me. Relief, yes. Justice, yes. But also sorrow, a sorrow so deep it felt like carrying a stone in my chest. I had won on paper. The law had recognized what was done to me. But no amount of money could bring back the years I lost, the home I built, the trust one once had in the two people who raised me. That trust was gone forever. In the weeks that followed, the money came slowly, in court-ordered payments. My parents sold off possessions, borrowed from relatives, even downsized their own home to comply. I should have felt satisfied watching them lose what they had stolen, but satisfaction was not what I felt. Instead, it was emptiness. Revenge had burned hot and bright, but once the fire was out, all that remained was Ash Point one evening. I drove out to the land where my house once stood. The new owners had moved in, renovating, repainting, planting flowers in the yard. It no longer looked like mine, but I could still see the bones of what I had built. The porch, the fireplace, the the frame of the windows, all remnants of my sweat and blood. I sat in my truck for a long time, watching the lights glow warmly inside. It stung, but also gave me clarity. That house had been stolen, yes, but the strength, the grit, the ability to build something from nothing, that was still mine. That was something no one could ever sell. Now, as I tell this story, I know one thing for certain. Family is not about blood. Family is about loyalty, about respect, about standing by each other when it matters most. My parents failed that test, and in doing so, they lost me. I will rebuild. Maybe not the same house, maybe not with the same dreams, but I will build again because that's who I am. And as for them, they taught me one final lesson. When betrayal comes from those closest to you, the only revenge worth taking is reclaiming your life, your dignity, and your freedom. And that, at last, is exactly what I did.